So good morning. I am a substitution, I think the expression is. I think a no-show speaker, so apologies. This is very improvised in terms, as you can tell, by the fact that the slides weren't loaded on the system. So my name is David Wilson. I'm the CEO of Fosway. Many of you may know us from our research around trends research or our Fosway 9 grids. So some of the market assessment tools we do. Just if it's of relevance, we just announced today the new 2023 learning systems, 9 grid for learning systems, so the new vendor assessment for learning management systems, LXPs and so on and things like that was announced today, and we have a stand over there if anybody's interested. What I'm going to try and do today is talk about some of our latest research around how we see corporate learning teams really having to pivot very quickly to deal with changing situation in terms of economy, skills challenges, business agility, upskilling, reskilling type things, but also how to deal with effectively an organization that now isn't in the workplace, a hybrid workforce effectively. I'm going to use a lot of data. The slides will be available. If anybody wants to grab me afterwards, I'm happy to send them to you. If you want to take pictures of the charts, then do, but we can send them to you or they'll be available from the Learning Technologies people. So one of the things I like to do whenever we're talking about what's going on within the world of learning or HR or whatever, is start with a very basic question, which is what's going on in your company? What is the most critical thing that your company is trying to deal with? And one of the interesting points, we've asked this question in our HR realities research for the last 10 years. And in every year, what the answer has been is we are trying to improve our performance and profitability of our company. Typically, our research is focused at private sector organizations, very large enterprises and so on. They always say, number one, improve our performance and profitability. And then afterwards, we had other things like customer satisfaction, dual growth, regional expansion, etc. A couple of years ago, this one appeared on the list at number 4th, then joint second, now clear second, which is around business agility. So one of the things, this is pre-COVID, that transition happened. Companies were already trying to really focus around a business agility story. And then obviously the COVID came along and their businesses changed, stopped, started, changed, whatever, it's transformed overnight. So business agility really became a huge thing as how do I change my operating model? My workforce is at home, I'm now a digital business, I almost have no physical face-to-face events and so on and whatever it's going to be. So huge changes. This year we ran it and for the first time, skills was identified. So this data is from November, so it's not very old. And skills was identified as the number one challenge that they're trying to deal with as a business. So again, there'll be lots of speakers here and lots of people in the expo that will talk to you about skills. These are it's obviously something that L&D thinks it owns. It thinks that it's a very common topic for us to talk about, particularly in the last couple of years. It's become very high profile, but it's absolutely a business critical C-suite issue, and organizations are really trying to focus on how they address it. From an L&D point of view, what that does is it creates a very interesting question, which is really where is their role? What is their role within the value chain around delivering those things? So think of each of those top 4 I identified. Not only how does it deliver, build skills and a more strategic approach to that, but also how does it enable business performance? How does it enable business agility and resilience and these kind of topics as well? And what's interesting from a timing perspective now is a lot of this narrative was created post-pandemic and in a world where the only thing that companies seemed to be assessing about was things like employee experience and the war for talent. Now we have these huge drivers around economy and recession and cost of money and interest rates and inflation and things like this. So we're in a very different economic time, and what that's doing is accelerating the change. That's very obvious if you look at what's going on with the tech firms at the moment, where pretty much most of the large tech firms have laid off anywhere between 8 and 15% of their workforce. Right? And these are companies that expanded massively because of the pandemic. So from an overall landscape, when we're looking at what we're trying to do within that L&D frame of reference, and when we're looking at where we want to use technology and be digital and be effective, we really need to understand how we anchor that and what drives where we are in the value chain. And also how it all ties into all these things. So at the top, we still have issues around pandemic and travel and things, but we also now have economic disruption. We have a war in Ukraine. We have supply chain issues. We have a workforce that doesn't seem to want to go back into the workplace. There's huge companies are really trying to deal with where their workers are and how they engage them. So if you're trying to run high value learning activities, you need to understand where those organizations are going to be. All this ties together, and there's a whole different set of strategies for adopting it. The interesting thing, this is not now an L&D only issue. HR is now in the table trying to control and drive a skills narrative. The recruiting people are looking at things like talent mobility and so on within the company as well as outside the company. So there's lots of strategies we're trying to connect together. This is a really interesting question. So this is aimed at an HR audience, not an L&D audience. But basically it's saying is, what are the key initiatives that you think are most important to future-proof yourself as you walk towards 2025? So again, this is a November 22 data point. And you can see at the top, so essential and desirable. Unimportant, it's kind of interesting. So rethinking workspaces, which is something that a lot of companies have been doing because their people aren't in the office, so they're selling office space off, etc. Okay, so it's probably desirable, but actually it's many people saying it's unimportant as they're saying it's important. But skills and capability building, empowering talent, lifelong learning and resilience, flexible working, these are really the critical things at the top. And as you can see, they're pretty much around 50% of organizations saying they are essential for their future strategy and future-proofing their business. Obviously, key in all of that is the skills question. And as I've referenced it multiple times, skills is something that L&D understands, right? It thinks it owns this topic. It knows it's important. But in most companies, it now doesn't control the topic. The topic is actually being controlled by the wider HR organization and so on. So the HR, sees skills as, really very important to it. 90% saying it's either, quite important or very important to the people strategy on a wider basis. The point of ownership. L&D sees building skills as a high priority for the success of their organization. Unsurprising, right? That would be turkeys voting for Christmas to say that skills weren't important if you were an L&D function, you would assume. But 79% say they see significant skill gaps in their organization. Okay, again, this is a topic that is very common to discuss. What's interesting is the skill gaps are getting wider. They're not, and we had Omar earlier talking about the world of AI, right? And how that's going to fundamentally change, not just what they offer as a business, but the businesses they offer it to. That's accelerating change, not a lot less. So the skills gaps are continuing to widen in most organizations. When you ask organizations how they address that and how they build critical talent roles, it's kind of interesting. So what's your preferred approach to building those critical roles in things? The answer is still, well, we hire people, except what we know is they can't hire them. They don't exist in the workforce. We try and promote people internally, except we haven't necessarily created a very coherent strategy for how we build their skills so that we can promote them into it. And maybe we will proactively develop. It's third on the list. Okay, so fundamentally, the ordering here is wrong. We can't hire for those skills. The pandemic actually made that even worse. Every company, what we saw was a real dearth of things like digital skills before the pandemic. And then every company became a digital business. So now skills is that digital skills became massively in demand. So when we look at the changes that are happening within the employee base, we look at even the skills that are being laid off, even within the tech industry, you're seeing a really significant shift towards kind of newer skills we can't hire. We have to build them. Yeah, we can't just use a succession because we haven't got people with them to succeed it. And this is a massive problem in huge scale for nearly every company. The C-suite, so the board, the executive, the CEO or whatever, expects the L&D team to step up and solve it. Okay, so what we're seeing is the increase in the focus on, or the expectation of, you show me you're actually making a difference. Don't tell me what you're running as programs. Don't even tell me what you're running as what you're spending. Tell me what outcome you're delivering. So 46%, and this is again a number that's increasing. The pressure on L&D to prove outcome, to show that it's really making a difference, is getting more and more. So it's a very challenging situation. It was already quite challenging, post-pandemic into recession and economic change, etc. We're seeing acceleration of the factors around it. From an L&D point of view, then the pressure to show a difference and be able to deliver more value and prove it is becoming stronger. How do they do that? So it's interesting when you now ask this question. This is from our digital learning realities research, which was published in, I think, September, October timeframe. So it's slightly older data than HR, but still for a lot of companies, like the number one strategy that they have to try and do that is formal training. Right? The difference now is those people aren't in the workplace. They're now working from home half the time, et cetera, as well. So how do they do that in a really effective way? And the biggest challenge for the whole digital learning industry is to move away from what I would call lowest common denominator solutions for instant fix the things, to how do we really build strategic skills and strategic capability in the workforce in a digitally led, enabled way in order to support a hybrid workforce. Just running basic compliance courses or basic knowledge acquisition doesn't build, robust, resilient leaders. It doesn't build people that understand the new business that they're trying to do. The other thing that's interesting here is the growth in things like coaching, on the job, etc. So the integration, I would say, between learning and work. So it used to be quite sexy in the last year or so to talk about learning in the flow of work. How many of you have heard of learning in the flow of work, right? So what does that mean? Okay, it just meant, but the reality is what we need to do is stop that separation, being learning that gets something done to you outside work, and then you come back in and then you do work. The boundaries between that have always been very artificial. And obviously the more that you start to, interesting, we have a thing within Fosway, we talk about the biggest challenge for blending is not blending one type of learning with the other, it's blending learning and work. Right? Because ultimately work is the thing that proves outcome, not learning. You can pass a bunch of tests, but if you can't sell or support the product or deliver or make a customer happy or solve a problem or create a new product or whatever it is, that's not effective. So we need outcome to be more based on it. Sorry, excuse me. The challenge we have is when we ask companies how good they are at delivering this stuff, we don't get a very nice answer. So if you say, how effective is your strategy for, and if we said compliance, how many of you think you've got a very effective strategy for doing compliance learning in your organization? Right? No? Very effective, yep. Slam dunk. This is supposed to be at 50%, so it's about here. Sorry, the line's in the wrong place. But about 50% of people say, they're very effective at compliance. Great. That's really helpful. How good are you at anything else? Not so good, right? So when we start thinking about personal development, onboarding, building a learning culture, upskilling and reskilling, the thing that we said was such a big thing, we're now down to less than 20% of people saying that their strategy for it is very effective. Okay, so we are still in a world where we can do basic compliance and probably product knowledge type stuff really well using digital, and everything else we don't do very well. Right? One of the key reasons for that is when I start looking at, and I'll go back to a topic that Omar was talking about, personalization, right? When we look at how do we personalize these things, we don't. We sheep dip people. You're familiar with that expression, sheep dip? Okay. When you mark sheep or you disinfect sheep, you stick them all through the same trough, right? One after another. So sheep dip means basically you take everybody and you stick them through the same training course, regardless of how much they knew, what their job was, what outcomes they had, whether it was successful or not, anything. You just it's a mass process, right? And the biggest problem is when you look at what's very personalized, coaching is actually reasonably personalized. That's not a massive surprise because it's typically a one-to-one interaction. The coaches will design a thing round. Obviously, as we try to make that a much more mass process, it becomes slightly less personalized, but at the end of the day, that's still pretty good. But then look again, beyond that, everything else becomes, not very personalized at all. So one of the biggest challenges we then have, and this then comes back, so I don't necessarily agree completely with what Aymar was talking about and that's not because I don't I don't buy into the AI story, but I think the reality of where we are in delivering a lot of this stuff is still a way to go. But at the end of the day, if we're still sticking the same people through the same learning, regardless of their knowledge, job role, or performance, we're doing something wrong. So we need to think about how we do that, okay? And ultimately, we need to do that in a way that is effectively a digitally enabled process, right? We can use it when we're doing some of the very one-to-one, very hands-on things. We can inherently personalize it at that level. How do we do it in scale, okay? And the expression, this is from David, our head of director of research. In a digital world, that's unforgivable that we are not able to do this. So when you're thinking about looking around and thinking about your strategy going forward, think about how do you, and when I say personalization, I don't just mean give a list of things that they might like. Everybody talks about the Netflix experience on their things, right? But when you watch a film in Netflix, you're watching the same film I am, right? You might like it, I might like it, great. But nobody expects us to be able to do a job afterwards, do they? Right? So the key thing is personalization on interface and access is only part of the story. Personalization on the learning within it is more important. So think about some of those changes. The other thing I think is just thinking about, and this is now a much wider question, it's really focused more from an HR perspective, is where does this sit in the whole gamut of things that we're trying to do with our people in companies, right? So this is an interesting question because it says, which are the highest priority for disruption in the next 12 months, okay? So we've got loads of things around this, when you're trying to change systems, what are you trying to do? What's your priority change? What's driving those change? But this is an interesting question, is what's your highest priority for disruption? Look at what's at the top of the list. Yeah? Skills, learning, recruiting. It's all about talent. It's all around the capabilities we have. These are all the highest priorities. So many of the companies, many of you be sat in the room and you've got multiple LMSs. You may be on your third, fourth, fifth, even 10th generation of what you've been trying to do there. It's still the highest priority for disruption in most of the organizations. Skills is number 2. Recruiting, onboarding, bringing actually people in and accelerating time to competency. These are really critical questions for them. And then a whole long list afterwards as well. So, as I said, the data in these slides will be available afterwards. If somebody wants to grab me or give me a card, I'm happy to send them. There's also a load of more of it on our website, et cetera, in terms of it. Ultimately, where are we going towards with this? Okay, so there's a direction of travel. If I had more time, we could start talking about things like skills intelligence and how we connect the idea around what skills we have and haven't got across the whole kind of people infrastructure. Okay, so this is a really hot topic, not least because everybody's trying to grab it and nobody wants to share or connect them together. But skills is a really interesting topic. But thinking about how skills and talent mobility, your ability to develop your roles and your things, the opportunities you have for work, not just the opportunities you have to learn. How does all this connect together, and how do we build the journey for that through our organization and through the processes, the systems that we have to support? Again, this is the journey we're starting to see kind of more enlightened companies trying to connect these pieces together. There's some real challenges because they don't have a single view of what skills are. They don't have a single view, a single journey. They have lots of different systems they're trying to connect together. And as I said, fundamentally, this transcends HR, not just learning. So it's actually a much wider process. So I hope you found some of the data info. So remember, I'm the fill-in, I'm the, what's the word? The BAT or whatever, just to do it. But hopefully you found some of the data useful. The research on our website said the latest 9-grid for learning systems, this is the 22 version. This is now, was launched today. So if you go over to and want to talk about learning systems and say LMSs and LXPs and all those things, including there's a handout in French if somebody's interested as well. You can also download the reports today in English and French and German as well. If you're interested in the other topic areas, happy to talk about those. Thank you very much and have a good day.
All right, David, thank you so much for filling in. Do you have time for maybe a question or two if there's anything people want to ask? Okay, what do we hear?
Hi, David. John Helmer, Learning Hack Podcast. Plug. When you showed that last slide there, the skills and talent mobility journey, who is doing this really well from a digital point of view? I wouldn't necessarily expect you to name names, but are the biggest companies doing it well? Is it happening best in the kind of smaller, innovative? What's your assessment of how the learning systems market is responding to that agenda?
Yes. Yeah, thanks, John. So the question was around who's doing this kind of stuff well, right? So I would say what we're starting to see is the jigsaw appearing, right? So various pieces appear within this. So if I look at certain things within that around things like work matching and talent mobility, right? This is a really hot topic. A lot of the vendors are basically adding things like talent marketplaces to their solutions. There's some really interesting case studies, companies like Schneider Electric and so on, where they're basically creating massive efficiency in the organization because of the ability to effectively bid for work available inside, within the organization. And there's an interesting, so this is not necessarily about a full gig economy type model, but it is about actually what are the opportunities for me to develop the skills I have? So one of the things I think you will see is that more and more of the learning systems stop focusing on which courses or videos or things are most relevant for me, but what work opportunities can I also work on that are relevant for me in order to build that skill set? If we can join that with what work opportunities are available and needed in the organization, we create a much more agile resourcing model. Okay? There is a very important shift here, though, that it's not about roles, it's about skills. It's what the skills, at the end of the day, it's I've got specific things I want to do, but the organization has specific needs it wants to do. How do I massify almost that process around joining them up? So some of the very big corporates have implemented these technologies around talent mobility and marketplaces, learning, the learning experience platform discussion where they're creating AI-based recommendations on so on. What I would say is at the moment, the best in class, these are still silo solutions. They're not fully joined up. So what we're starting to see is that on one level, at a large enterprise, those things join up. What we're also starting to see is the infection of the mid-market with the same ideas. So whereas before, if you go and look at a learning system that's targeted at mid-market, it did its learning management stuff, typically to a level of sophistication relevant to its target audience. Now it also has to try and be an LXP platform too. Now it has to have some kind of skill story or AI story. So you see the infection, if you like, of the mid-market with those more high-level ideas. Now in reality, when you then look at that, you say, well, there's still, in the mid-market, there are a lot of companies, they don't have the complexity or sophistication. If you're a retail organization or a hospitality business or something, you might have lots of people, but they're all in the same job role. And what you're actually trying to do is just get them engaged in stuff and things like this. It's actually relatively simplistic in terms of what you're trying to do. But if you look at some of the professional service firms, the fast growth, fintech, and all those kinds of things, obviously they function as a more sophisticated buyer. So it's not about size, it's about sophistication as well. And if you're on that higher sophistication level, the potential relevance of those kinds of solutions happens a lot earlier. The challenge is that for a lot of them, they've had to go and buy a big enterprise, separate system, expensive, integrate it together. So what we now need to, we're now starting to see, as I said, is some of that becoming more available in the mid-market. We're also starting to see that the vendors are getting better. We have as part of our research, we deconstructed a lot of this and focused on a set of characteristics like intelligence, skills, that were, collaboration that were underneath it. One of the interesting ones within that is what we would call ecosystemness, the ability to play nicely in the ecosystem, to connect bits together, not to have APIs and integration modules and things like this, but just to flick a switch and it suddenly connects into your HR system or into your learning system. So this is where it needs to go for it to become more there. So at the moment, it's still quite siloed. Some of the big companies are doing really a lot of work around skills graphs and connecting those across the infrastructure. But actually, we're still the jigsaw is still coming together for most of them. And for the mid-market, it needs to infect the mid-layer for it to become more viable. Okay?
Fantastic. Well, thank you once again, David. Thanks for filling in. More on the Fosway Group website if you want to go check it out. And thanks for being here. So we're actually going to have a break in this room for the next half hour. We're back at